The earth has many beautiful women. Most men cherish them. A woman is the core strength of a family, frequently becoming the matriarch of that family. The sheer warmth and love from a mother is unmatched on earth. Today we're going to discuss an incident that happened back in the 70s where one man changed all of this for multiple families. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Rest in peace to the victims. In the 1970s, if you ran across an officer named Chris Hagen, Kenneth Misner, Officer Roseland, Richard Burton, or Rolf Miller, beware. These names were used between 1974 and 1978 by an individual named Theodore Robert Cowell. His deception and charm were used to lure young women and girls to their deaths. His disgusting acts spanned across at least 5 to 7 states and ending in Florida, where he met his demise. Today, let's discuss the true origin of this monster. Theodore Robert Cowell would later be known as the infamous serial killer, Ted Bundy. Here's the story. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, at the Elizabeth Lung Maternity Home. This home was designed specifically for unwed mothers. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was 22 when she had Ted and was alone. You see, rumors have swirled for years that Louise's own father, Ted's grandfather, was actually his father, who had SA'd Louise for years. Louise's family was extremely religious, so having a baby out of wedlock was unacceptable. Later, as they were living with his grandparents, Ted's mom later met a man named Johnny Bundy. Bundy eventually adopted Ted, and Ted later became known as Ted Bundy. Bundy loved Ted, however, Ted rejected him, as he thought he wasn't rich enough for his taste. While Bundy's mother and Ted Bundy Sr. went on to have 4 more kids of their own, Ted frequently struggled to fit in, as he didn't want to be classified as middle class. Ted attended Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, Washington, and although he was smart, he didn't excel very well. Ted also had trouble finding friends, as he was frequently teased for his speech impediment. Bundy was also known to be a pathological liar. He also enjoyed pornography and violence. Bundy would eventually enroll at the University of Puget Sound in Washington. Bundy spent a year here and then transferred to the University of Washington, where he studied Chinese. It is also here where Bundy met his first girlfriend. He was immediately smitten with Diane Edwards from California. She was beautiful, rich, and exactly what Ted wanted. Although at first they were both madly in love, Diane eventually felt that Ted didn't fit into her scheme of things and ended their relationship. Ted was furious. It is later stated, and as you'll see, most of his victims had the same hair structure and color as Diane. This was the beginning of a monster. As Bundy began to mingle more with his church friends, people began to trust him. They thought he could do no wrong. He was articulate, handsome, and bright. Boy, were they wrong. As Bundy continued to gain the trust of those around him, little did they know, when they weren't in his company, he was peeping through windows, looking at women's underwear, and breaking into homes and stealing things from women. Sometime in October of 1969, Ted met Elizabeth Cloffer, who was a single mother and worked at the local medical facility on campus. As their relationship grew, Bundy became a father figure to her daughter. However, after some time, he started disappearing for long periods of time, raising suspicion from her. Due to Ted's abusive ways, Elizabeth started abusing alcohol. In 1972, Ted graduated from the University of Washington with a psychology degree. He then enrolled in law school at the University of Puget Sound. However, he was known for not attending his classes on time, frequently missing classes. In early 1974, women across Seattle started going missing. Linda Ann Healy was a 21-year-old socialite from an upper-class family who was one of the first, a psychology student at the University of Seattle. On October 30th, 1974, while having drinks with friends, she didn't know that Ted Bundy frequented that bar as well. Later that evening, after speaking with her boyfriend and her roommate, this was the last time anyone heard from Linda. It is suspected that Bundy snuck into her home after she'd fallen asleep and strangled her, which he later admitted to doing. Just 3 weeks earlier, Karen Sparks, an 18-year-old dancer, disappeared. It is suspected that Ted entered her basement apartment and bludgeoned her to death with a pole from her bedpost. Bundy SA'd her so bad she had internal damage. Karen's attack was so brutal that she was in a coma for 10 days and was left with permanent disabilities. However, she was one of the luckier ones. She survived. Just 2 weeks later, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson disappeared on her way to a folk class. Bundy apparently abducted her in between her dorm and the activities center. On the 17th of April, Suzanne Rancourt was abducted. It is said that she was last seen washing her clothes when Bundy must have abducted her. Bundy would later state, one familiar tactic that he used on many of his victims was to appear that he was injured by wearing a cast on his arm, assuring a level of sympathy from his victims. Almost 3 weeks later, Roberta Kathleen Parks was walking to talk with a friend when she disappeared. It is said that Bundy saw the young lady in the cafeteria eating a sundae, offered her to go out for drinks, and she accepted. As Bundy lured her to his Volkswagen Beetle, he lied to her and told her that he needed to collect the thesis. It wasn't until her skull was found at Taylor Mountain when they connected her death to Ted. On the 31st of May, Brenda Ball, a 22-year-old free-spirited woman, was abducted. Around 2 a.m., while calling friends to see if they could come and pick her up, Ted offered her a ride to the nearby campground where she was intending to stay. She never made it. Her skull was later found on Taylor Mountain in May of 1975. Just 2 weeks later, Georgianne Hawkins, after leaving her boyfriend's dormitory and walking back to her own dormitory, confronted Ted Bundy, who was wearing a cast, and asked for her to help him load something into his trunk. As soon as she got to the back of his trunk, he hit her in the head with a crowbar. It was later said that Bundy had hit her so hard that one of her shoes and earrings were left at the spot where he had abducted her. During the trip, she regained consciousness, and Bundy promised her that she would make it to her Spanish class the next day, knowing all too well she wouldn't. After driving a bit further, Bundy pulled over, strangled her, and decapitated her, leaving her severed head 25 to 30 yards away from the rest of her body. He also left her clothes on Taylor Mountain. As police were baffled, multiple postings were put up for young ladies to remain careful and to travel in pairs and only use their front doors. On the 14th of July, 1974, Bundy joined 40,000 other people at Lake Sakwa for a festival. Later, around 10 a.m., Ted was seen speaking with Janice Ann Ott, a 23-year-old who was visiting the area as well. Witnesses would later say that she was last seen walking towards where Ted told her he had a boat that he needed help with. The problem is, Ted didn't own a boat. It was just a ploy, and she was never seen again. In an act of pure evil, later that same day, Bundy drove back out to the lake and was later seen speaking with Denise Marie Newsland. She disappeared the same day. Ted would later confess that Janice was still alive when Denise was abducted. and he made one of them watch as the other one was murdered. At this point, police were asking anyone with information concerning the killer to come forward. On the 2nd of September of the same year, Ted was driving near Boise, Idaho, and picked up a teenage girl. Her name to this day is unknown. Ted later confessed that he strangled her, SA'd her, and dismembered her corpse, leaving it strewn in the river nearby. Her body has never been found. Meanwhile, as the police were looking for their suspect, Elizabeth identified him as Ted Bundy. You see, she's called police on multiple occasions, stating that she thought that her boyfriend was responsible for these missing girls. 1 month later, Nancy Wilcox, a 16-year-old girl who had been arguing with her father, left her home and was never seen again. Nancy's disappearance was reported by her parents 3 months later, as they thought she just ran away. Her body was never found. 2 weeks later, on October 18th, Melissa Smith went missing. After eating some pizza with a friend in a parlor, she was walking home to her dormitory. Witnesses would later say they heard screaming coming from around the corner. This is where it is assumed that Ted abducted her. Bundy would later admit that he SA'd her, strangled her, and left her body face down in the woods nearby, later to be found by hunters. Then on October 31st, Laura Ann Aim, who was celebrating with some friends for Halloween, went missing after leaving to go buy cigarettes. In November of the same year in 1974, her body was found in some nearby woods. Just 1 week later, Carol Durant was shopping in a shopping mall when Ted Bundy approached her. He stated that he had a police officer friend who was detaining a suspect near a Camaro that she drove. As Bundy convinced the young lady to go with him down to the police station, he eventually drove around to the back of a building where she became suspicious. He told her that they needed to go down to the main police station and got her back in the car. Once the young lady was back in the car with him, he put a handcuff on her. However, she was smart and she jumped out of the vehicle, running as fast as she could. Ted jumped out of the car and chased after her with a crowbar. However, an elderly couple saw her and she got away. Later that same day, Deborah Jean Kent was going to pick up her brothers. She was never seen again. Ted later confessed that he abducted her before she even reached her father's car, later taking her back to his apartment where he SA'd her, strangled her, and buried her body. Only her pelvic bone was ever found. While Bundy was in Utah, the Seattle police had found the remains of 4 bodies. These bodies were later identified as Brenda Ball, Linda Ann Healy, Susan Rancourt, and Roberta Parks, and all had been killed by blunt force trauma. Just 2 months later, Karen Campbell was traveling with her family and came up missing. After leaving her fiance for a few moments at the lodge where they were staying to go back to the room to retrieve a magazine, Ted was waiting for her on the 2nd floor. He hit her in the head so hard he killed her. However, he also performed necrophilia and buried her body. Her body was later found by a passerby who saw some birds flocking in an area. Then on the 15th of March in 1975, Julie Cunningham, a ski instructor, came up missing. It is said that after abducting her, Ted handcuffed her, but she regained consciousness during the trip out to where he was taking her. He later would strangle her, returning to her body days later. Just 3 weeks later, Denise Lynn Oliverson was arguing with her husband. She decided to get on her bike and go out for a ride. It was later determined that Ted must have lured her into his vehicle, and he then assaulted her. Then on the 6th of May, he parked his vehicle outside of Alameda Junior High School. There, he confronted 12-year-old Lynette Culver, who came up missing. Bundy later admitted that he strangled her and killed her. Her body was never found. Now, on the 27th of June, 1975, Susan Curtis, a 15-year-old who was with some friends, went missing. In a stroke of bad luck for Bundy, he was actually arrested by a police officer under the suspicion of kidnapping. He attended several trials, and while awaiting trial in Colorado, he escaped. Bundy then got on a plane from Colorado to Chicago. From there, he went to Atlanta, and then finally down to Florida. Once in Florida, Ted began to stalk various sorority houses, in particular picking out one. 21-year-old Margaret Bowman was sleeping when Ted attacked her. He bashed her head in so much that her brain protruded out of it. Next, he went over to Lisa Levy, a 20-year-old who was asleep. Later, it was found after he killed her, she had been sexually assaulted with a spray bottle as well. He then went on to attack Kathy Kleiner and Karen Handler, both of whom luckily survived. Less than a mile away, Ted ran to an apartment complex where he confronted Cheryl Thomas. He hit her, attempted to SA her. However, the neighbors heard it, and he had to flee. Bundy was now on Florida's most wanted list with the FBI. And then on the 9th of February, Kimberly Leach, who was walking back to retrieve something from her classroom, ran into Ted Bundy, who told her that her family members had been injured and that she needed to go with them. Kimberly was only 12 years old, and she agreed to go with Bundy. Forensic reports would later confirm that as soon as Bundy got her in the van, blood found there was from Kimberly, meaning he slit her throat, took her out to the woods, and SA'd her, leaving her body in a hog pen. Unfortunately for Bundy, this was the end of the road for him, as he'd left too much evidence that was tied back to him. The Florida authorities were now on his trail. As Bundy attempted to elude authorities, he ditched his van for a stolen Volkswagen Bug. Then on the 15th of February, police officer David Lee was patrolling and noticed that an orange Volkswagen Beetle had been stolen. Bundy was driving. He attempted to arrest him. Bundy attempted to flee. However, he caught him and took him to jail. Later, Bundy's semen, footprints, and other evidence were found on Kimberly Leach's body. Once she was found in the hog pen, Bundy's fate was sealed. Bundy would later confess to over 30 murders. However, his true number of killings is suspected to be in the hundreds. Finally, on the 24th of January 1989, Theodore Ted Bundy met his demise. He was executed in Florida's electric chair. It is said that he was extremely nervous and scared before he walked into his execution. Good for him. Taking into account to what this demon has done, I think it's appropriate to remember his victims, and not this monster. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina? And please remain vigilant and alert, as there could be another Ted Bundy out there lurking. God bless. When someone is unalived, it not only changes their life, but generations of lives after them. May God rest the souls of the victims of this monster. Take care.